Welcome to Voices of Resilience by Silver Screen Family, where we celebrate the remarkable stories of LGBTQIA plus elders. If you're as inspired as we are by these stories, please show your support by clicking the subscribe button below. By subscribing, you'll stay updated with our latest episodes and help us share these invaluable stories with a wider audience. Thank you.
Section 28 had virtually no effect on me personally at all, because obviously I wasn't involved in schools, and I never got local authority funding for anything that I did. During the 90s, I was actually working in the voluntary sector in various capacities, and my theatre work was basically a spare time activity. I say spare time because I was actually working 3 days a week, so that gave me enough time to write and to do all the other things as well. And in some ways, I mean, nobody was ever prosecuted under Section 28. It was a kind of paper tiger. It was a sop that Margaret Thatcher threw to her sort of more right-wing backbenchers. The thing was, a local authority couldn't promote this, and the big argument was about schools. There was a book called Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin that was quoted as being shoving homosexuality down little kiddies' throats and all that sort of stuff. In fact, local authorities had no control over education and sex education. That boat had already sailed 2 years previously. 1986 Education Act had passed all the curriculum stuff and all the management of schools to each individual school, and the responsibility was the school governors. It was nothing to do with the local authority at all. It was a complete myth, this. But what it did do is it put the fear of God in people, and its effects were negative in that they stopped people doing things that they would otherwise have done, purely of self-preservation, self-oppression, if you like. They could have carried on, certainly the law would never have touched them, but they didn't, a lot of them. And things like teachers who previously would have come out in the classroom and been a role model to the kids who were queer or thought they might be queer as well, didn't, and so on. So that was what the profound effect of Section 28 was. It was a psychological effect. Hello there, my name's Eric Presland. Originally is the name I was born with. I changed it in the year 2000 to Peter Scot-Presland. There's a story behind that which I'll go into later. I was born in 1949, so I'm 74 now, and I was brought up variously in East Finchley in North London, and then in Woodside Park, which is same direction but a bit further out. I went to school. First of all, I went to a kindergarten called Mrs. Burma's in Muswell Hill, and then I went to public school after that from the age of 8 to about 18, and it was there that I had my sort of first gay awakening, so to speak. The first time I remember feeling anything gay was there was a boy called David who lived on the same direction from the school from me. He was a bit further past me, so he came to my house first and then he went on to his house. And I was walking to school from a very, very early age. I was walking to school from the age of about 6 to the kindergarten, which was about 1.5 miles away, because in those days kids had a lot more freedom than they do today. And then when I went to the junior school, I walked to that as well, which was up Highgate Hill, very steep hill. And then we used to come home afterwards, and he'd stop off at my house for a sort of slice of cake and a glass of milk sort of thing. I'm talking about the age of maybe 8, 9, something like that. And we used to go up to my bedroom and sort of fool around. I don't mean sexually fool around, but I mean sort of have things like pillow fights, for example. And I remember one day we had this pillow fight, and we were bashing each other with the pillows and stuff, and I suddenly found myself lying on top of him and kissing him. And he was going, "Ew, get off, get off, get off." And that was that. I did get off, and I was a bit sort of worried. When I was doing it, it didn't feel like anything other than natural. You know, it was part of affection. It was part of the fight, if you like. But afterwards, obviously, you start to feel a bit guilty if somebody's reacted in that kind of way. And the next day, when I got to school, I was called in to see the headmaster, Mr. Sherman, and he said, "I'm separating you from David. You're not going to sit in the same part of the classroom together. He made one of us sit at the back, one at the front, because you're a bad influence on each other." That's all he said. So that was my first sort of experience of homosexuality, which was obviously a dreadful, shameful thing to be involved in. And then I went up to the senior school. This was a place called Highgate. It's a minor public school. And the next thing I can remember in terms of gay feelings, I joined the fencing club because I hated ball games, and fencing seemed like a way of getting out of doing any serious games at all. So I joined the fencing club and turned out to be quite good at it, actually. But the changing rooms, and there was an American boy there called Eric, also called Eric, but his was spelled with a K in the American way. And he had one of those natural athlete's bodies. He really, really did, and this sort of honey gold skin and so on. And I was absolutely crazy for him and stuff. And I can remember watching him changing out of the corner of my eye and all that sort of stuff. And then he turned around one day and he said, "What are you, queer or something?" And at that stage, I didn't even know what that meant. I was very naive. Well, I think we all were. We're talking now about the early 1960s. We're talking about maybe 63, 64, something like that. So all I knew, again, this was something dreadful. And after that, I spent some time trying to pretend that I was just like everybody else and I liked girls and stuff like that. I went on a school cruise. In those days, they had ships that went around the Mediterranean. There were two of them. One of them was called the Danera, which is the one I went on, and I can't remember what the other one was called. And I went on this one when I was 16. I'd been a couple of years previously, but this is the one where I sort of like blossomed, if you like. And as soon as I got on board, I went down with flu. We had 3-week cruise. We got on in Venice, and by the time we got down towards Dubrovnik, I'd come out of sick bay, and everybody else was paired off. All the boys had paired off with girls and had their sort of ship's girlfriend, and so on. It was all very sweet. And there was me, and there was one girl left, who I will call Rihanna, though her name was not Rihanna. And she was very red-faced, and she had hair like wire wool, I remember that. And so we'd have sort of smooching on the deck at night and things like that, and there would be dances as well. This is the first time I heard the Beatles. This was. So I'd been 15 then, if it's the Beatles, 64. And so everybody else was sort of snogging and stuff. And I actually didn't know what to do. I had no sex education. My sex education consisted of a British Medical Association pamphlet, which my father or my mother had left in my bookshelf among the sort of Sherlock Holmes and all the other stuff, in the hope that I would run across it and read it. Well, I did run across it, and I looked through it, and it had these pictures of sort of tubes and tadpoles swimming up and down them and things like that. And I just sort of put it back, and it really went over my head like that. So I was very, very ignorant by the time I went onto this cruise. And so I was watching what everybody else did and sort of copying them, basically, because I didn't actually know what you did with girls at this stage. Mine was an all-boys school, you see. And much to my surprise, she proved to be a lot more willing and eager than all the other girls seemed to be. And we ended up going down into the hold of the ship, which is where all the sort of suitcases and everything was stored, because these were very tiny cabins, dormitory cabins. And so we were lying there, and we were fumbling and having sex in a very sort of amateurish way. And again, there was a dormitory fight going on between two dormitories on either side of this hold. So as we were doing this, people were throwing plimsolls against the walls. This is like metal walls, and they were echoing these plimsolls all around the place as we were trying to have sex. And every time one hit, she went sort of like that. And it wasn't because of what I was doing that she was having an orgasm or stuff. So anyway, we did it, as I say, rather to my surprise. And afterwards, you go around onto deck. What happened? We saw you go down to the hole. What happened? And I sort of rather boastfully said we'd had sex and stuff. And of course, it was right around the ship next day. And I was called up to the captain's cabin about this. And did you do this? Of course, we denied it, but they knew that we had, sort of thing. And the headmistress of the girls' school, whose name was Mrs. Woolsey Niche, I remember, and she wore little hard hats like bowler hats, and as soon as we got off at the next place, which was Piraeus for Athens. As soon as we got over there, as we were going out, as we were going down the gangplank, she called after me, "Hi, Presland, you, sir." She was like that. I mean, she had the kind of voice that carried a long way at horse fairs and things like that. And she said, "I'll have you horsewhipped." She actually said, and she came down the gangplank rather, in her little hard hat, with a riding crop, and down the. I mean, she'd be struck off for child abuse now, of course, but that was my first introduction to heterosexual sex. And I mean, the rest of that cruise, again, Rihanna and I avoided each other like the plague, because we didn't dare be seen together and stuff. And she started hanging out with much younger boys, I think, because she thought it was safer. And I didn't really do anything about my gay side at all, except try and avoid it. And after that, I mean, I did have other girlfriends at school. When I went to college, I went up to Oxford in 1969 to St Edmund Hall, which is one of the smaller colleges. And literally the first day I was there, I got seduced by another girl, which I don't know why, I must have been rather attractive, though I didn't realise it at the time. And her name was Leslie. And literally, we were at the Freshers' Fair, where you go around and find out what societies are offering, whether you want to join the dramatic society or the music or whatever, do that. And so this girl said, "Do you want to come back to my room for tea?" And I said, "Oh, yes, thank you very much." And she had my clothes off before we got through the door almost. It was amazing. And I think that's true of so many people when they go up to college. They just let off the leash. They're so horny. And certainly this is true in the end of the 60s. So there was all that. At the same time, I knew all these things were desperately unsatisfactory as well. I had college friends who I was very, very much sort of smitten with, that unrequited passion that you have for straight friends and so on. I had all that. And then there was one who I'm still in touch with, called Ken, who left college at the end of the first year, but I stayed in touch with him. And he was bisexual. And so that was the first time that I ever actually got to have sex, and it was with a friend, and it was one of those kind of exploratory kind of things. And the first time we had sex was, do you know Kenwood House in Hampstead Heath? It's a big 18th century house. They got lots of nice paintings there. They got Rembrandt and Hans Hals and stuff. And we had sex on a bench in front of Kenwood House in the middle of the night under a full moon, and it was all very romantic and stuff. And I suddenly knew, yes, this is really it, But again, I was an undergraduate then, and I still didn't do anything about it particularly. And I didn't do anything about it until I was a postgraduate, which was about the age of 22. And what changed my life completely was in October 1971, we used to on Saturday nights go around roaming around to see if there were any parties anywhere. You were always looking for somebody else holding a party. So if anybody was holding a party, you ended up being just elbowed out by all these gate crashers, because these are tiny little college rooms in medieval or Tudor rooms, sort of thing. So I was in St Edmund Hall, and at the other end of New Lane, there was Wadham College, Hertford College, and there was this queue up the stairs to this poor guy's room, trying to get into this party. There were about 200 people trying to get into this undergraduate room. It was completely crazy. So the real party was actually happening on the stairs anyway. And just ahead of me on the queue up the stairs, I saw somebody wearing a Gay Liberation Front badge. And I was just astonished. I was just astonished that anybody could be so open about something which I'd been desperately trying to hide and conceal all that time. I'd been keeping diaries, for example, and in my diary there's things about, how wonderful so-and-so is, but I'm not gay. I kept writing it, all in denial. So anyway, I buttonholed, his name was Mick, and I buttonholed him and told him the story of my boring life and ruined his evening for him, probably. And he told me had been down to London and he'd been to meetings of GLF in All Saints in Notting Hill, and he told me how exciting these were and how many hundred people went along and all these other things. And it literally changed my life overnight. Within 2 weeks, I'd told everybody I knew at college that I was gay. When I went home at Christmas, which was that would have been October, so this would have been December. I'd have gone back home. I came out to my father, which was a mistake. What happened was it was Christmas Eve, and I'd been out to go and see some old school friends and have a drink and a reunion sort of thing. And I come home slightly the worse for wear. And my dad was sitting up mulling over a scotch or something. And he said, come in, happy Christmas, come and sit down and stuff. Have a drink. And so I was sort of sharing a sort of scotch over by the fire on Christmas. And in the course of this conversation, I said to him, actually, Dad, I think I ought to tell you I'm gay. And it was like that. I just changed completely. You can't be. How come? We haven't taught you about that. We haven't taught you to be gay. How come? Denying you can't be. And it went on. And the line of his that I always remember was, "None of your aunts will kiss you, son." Now, if you'd known my aunts, you would have known that was actually really positive encouragement to being gay. But anyway, he said that. And then he said, I want you out of this house. I said, what about my mum? And he said, don't worry, I'll deal with that. Now, the problem was, of course, it was Christmas Eve. And in those days, there was no Christmas transport until about 3 days later. Everything was closed. So I was stranded at this house. But by this stage, they'd moved out to Thame in Oxfordshire. We were stranded. Was it in Thame at that stage? No, it wasn't. We were still in London. We were in Woodside Park. They must be because I'd seen school friends. And so I was stuck there at home with this great unmentionable secret between me and my dad, because he did. What, if you tell one parent, they always say, whatever you do, don't tell the other, because they think the other one can't cope with it, even if they can. So I was stuck there. And Christmas Day, the next day, my family, at least my father's family, was quite large. There were 6 children, one of whom, after whom I was named, my Uncle Eric, died. He was killed during the war. He was shot down over Egypt, and he's somewhere in the Sahara, never been recovered. But the other 5, we used to meet up every Christmas, and we used to rotate where we went to. Sometimes it would be our house, sometimes it would be my Auntie Pat or whatever. And so there'd be 20 people or so, counting cousins and things. And the next day, it was our turn to host it. And there were sort of 15, 20 people there and stuff. And, of course, this secret was the elephant in the room. And everything that happened that day seemed to draw attention to this, which is sort of weird, because they sort of had the television on, of course, and it would have been Dick Emery mincing around, doing his stuff. And then I remember in the crackers, they have these little plastic toys in crackers and stuff. My Uncle Bill got a pair of plastic lips, red plastic lips, like that. And of course, the first thing he does, he puts this in, and he goes camping around the room and doing all the sort of gay stereotype stuff. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, what do I do, sort of thing. So that's how that day went. I couldn't leave till about the 27th, and I did, and I went back. I went back to Oxford, and I didn't see my parents again for about 6 months after that. And my mother wrote to me, obviously she'd been told at some stage during the course of this, and she wrote saying, come back, it doesn't make any difference, blah, blah, blah. And so that's how I got back with them, except it was never mentioned. It took them a long time to even mention the subject again, and even longer before they got to the stage where they said, well, if you have anybody in your life, we'd like to meet them. That must have taken 10 years or more. So that's my sort of family side, if you will. Except I discovered years later, one of the things that may have fed into this reaction, my Auntie Maureen had a secret sorrow. She'd been married to a vicar called Frank Coulson, who'd run away with a choir boy to Oswestry. And that's one of the reasons, that was never mentioned either. So that's one of the things that feeds into this whole unmentionable subject as well.
Darlings, welcome to a journey that's more dazzling than a Hollywood premiere. Picture a world where you can hear the echoes of great-grandparents' laughter, bear witness to your grandparents' daring adventures, and relive your parents' most cherished moments. This dream is not out of reach. It's the driving force behind Silver Screen Family. They swoop in like modern-day magicians, capturing these priceless memories and weaving them into films that will stand the test of time. These tales aren't mere anecdotes, they're vessels of wisdom and values. Through them, Life's lessons are passed down from one generation to the next, a legacy more valuable than the finest jewels. Whether it's overcoming adversity, embracing change, or savoring life's smallest joys, these stories offer insights no classroom could ever replicate. Silver Screen Family is like your family's personal time machine, capturing stories in all their glory. It's like Netflix, but instead of binge-watching shows, you're binge-watching your family's greatest hits. Together, let's create enduring legacies that will touch the hearts of generations to come. Visit silverscreenfamily.com today and let Silver Screen Family help you create a lasting tribute to your loved ones. Don't wait. Start preserving your family memories now.
So I'm back at college after Christmas. I'm in the middle of a year's teacher training. I'd done my undergraduate degree. I did a certificate of education for a year. And I was sent for my teaching practice. We had a term's teaching practice in the middle of the thing. I was sent to a public school to do my teaching practice called Radley, which there was a television program about a few years ago. It was so posh. It was unbelievably posh. It wasn't far from Oxford, so it was dead easy to get to. And it was a rowing school as well. It had sort of, it had eights down the Thames there as well. And the reason I got there was because I went to see a school in Coventry, a comprehensive school in Coventry, and I rolled up for my interview with the headmaster, and the headmaster sort of gave me a complete dressing down for not wearing a suit and being in a tie and treating me like a 16-year-old. So I told him, if this is how you treat your teachers, I shudder to think what you do to your boys, and I just walked out and said I'm not going there. So I got sent to this posh public school instead, which was so posh that the masters dined separately from the children, the boys. It's an all-boys school, boys, and they had a butler. They had a butler in a livery, and I was teaching English. I was doing that. The one joy about being there for my teaching practice was that Mick, who was the guy who had the GLF badge on, who I'd become friends with, came to stay. You were allowed to bring people to your to sort of special occasions for dinner, sort of formal dinner or whatever, and people brought their partners and stuff. So me being all political now, I brought him along to this public school as my partner, and we were both there in dinner jackets and stuff. And I have to say, they behaved very, very well. I was really surprised. I was expecting a lot worse reaction than we got. But that was my first little gesture of political activism. And then after the dinner, of course, he stayed over, and I was being housed in the house of the senior French master, who him and his wife and 3 children and stuff. Okay, and I had a room upstairs, and Mick was in that, so we got to shag in the French master's house while I was on teaching practice, which is the only time I got to shag with Mick, much to my regret. In the summer, again, I had a theatrical sort of background. I'd been doing kind of school plays and things. This would have been the summer of 1972, and I'm not quite sure how I managed to get it, but I decided I was going to direct a play, put a play on, and one of the people who I knew in my college had also sort of come out to me. He'd come out to me before I'd come out. And I'd been so fucking patronizing to him. I thought, oh, you poor man, how sad, how tragic. And it was ridiculous. I still blush. I'm still so ashamed of the way I reacted to that. But anyway, he'd written this play called And What About Me, which was basically a triangular play of a man who's having an affair with a woman and a man at the same time, right? And I wanted to put it on, and I put it on at the Oxford Playhouse as a college production and directed it. And it was quite pioneering, except that in the time between when we decided to do it and the time it actually came on, the film Sunday Bloody Sunday came out. Have you heard of that? You know that one? Yes. Glenda Jackson and Peter Finch and Murray Head. And it came out, and me and Mick sort of sat in the ABC in Oxford and watched this, and our faces just fell, because this was our play. This was the subject of our play. Of course, we thought ours was much better, but we thought, oh my God, we thought we were doing something completely original, and here's this fucking thing come along in the meantime. How dare it? Couldn't they have waited for a year or something? Anyway, we did it, and it was one of the first gay plays to be kind of a serious gay play, which treated a straight relationship and homosexual relationship on absolute parity. The same number of kisses and everything, same bedroom scene or whatever. The only problem with the play, with What About Me, was I followed the stage directions. Now, Nigel, who wrote the play, was a heavy smoker. And when you're writing something, if you can't get a block, you have another cigarette as you're going along, right? And every so often, when he wrote in a stage direction saying, so-and-so lights up a cigarette, right? And at no point did I ever count how many cigarettes were being lit during the course of this play. So you'd have somebody lighting a cigarette and putting it down, and 5 minutes later they'd light another one while the first one was still there. And there were cigarettes all over the place, and there was clouds of smoke everywhere. And it got to the stage one night when this was doing it, where the audience started applauding the next time he lit up a cigarette. So that was yes, never trust the stage directions completely. And so that was bad. But at least it put us on the map. And in the summer after that. No, it wasn't that term, it was the next term, September 72. I got the idea that we really needed a group in Oxford of some kind, because I'd been with Mick to a disco the previous term while we were doing the play, in Reading, because Reading had a very lively gay sock at the time. And they had this disco in a huge dining hall. There weren't that many of us. There were about 30 of us. We were rattling around in this enormous space, although it did give you a lot of room to do that kind of expressive dancing that you did in the 70s, which is great. And there were 3 people there from the Gay Liberation Front. And they were from the kind of rad femme end of it. They were the radical drag things. And they sort of very, I'd say, over made up. At the time, I totally freaked out, even though, because I wasn't out for that long, you see. And there's these guys looking like pandas on acid, and they're going around haranguing people about why aren't you in drag? You've got to shed these trappings of masculinity. You've got to, you've got to. Become a radical femme, basically, is what they were saying, right? And I resented being told what to do, because I'm an only child and used to getting my own way. And B, it was too soon. It really was too soon. So when we went back to Oxford in the autumn and we wanted to start something, there used to be a magazine called Daily Information, which is basically a double-sided A1 information sheet for all the groups that were on, all the plays and films and concerts and stuff that were on in Oxford every day. And you could take out adverts in there for nothing. And so I put an advert in, and as I say, it came out every day, and the guy who ran it, his name was John something, I can't remember. He used to cycle around Oxford with this huge bag full of these things and just distribute them literally everywhere. And so they put this up, and it said, are you interested in forming a gay group? come to, I forget the name of the pub, Mulbrams, that's it, Mulbrams. And so we went on there. About 30 people turned up, something like that, on the day. And we had discussions about the name and what we wanted to do and stuff like that. And they were very insistent, and I was insistent as well, that we didn't want to be a GLF group, partly because of my experience, what I'd had in London, and also because by that stage, Gay News was out, our first big, national fortnightly paper. And there were stories in there about the way different groups of GLF were behaving towards each other, which were not nice. So we said, no, we don't want that. Now, we didn't want to be a CHE group either, Campaign for Homosexual Equality. There was a CHE group in Oxford. In fact, there were two. There was a town one and a gown one. The university one was basically a weekly sherry party run by a guy called Christopher Strachey, who was Lytton Strachey's nephew, who was one of the first big computer people in London. He was a big computer professor, and he'd worked on Enigma with Alan Turing before, earlier and stuff. He was absolutely sweet. He was lovely. He was so welcoming, so cool. But they were just a sherry party. That's what they did. The town one was so closetty that the convener didn't even advertise his name. He wouldn't have his name publicised at all. So we thought, we don't want to be one of those. And so we came up with the name of the Oxford Gay Action Group, which was, as I say, the autumn of that year. And we decided we wanted to do two things. We decided we wanted to have a switchboard, somewhere where people could contact. And we found a place in a sort of radical bookshop called Uhuru on Cowley Road, and we used the back room there. And we were 2 hours a night, every night, 7 nights a week. And we were the first switchboard in the country. There were other advice lines. There was Friend, a thing called Friend, which was an offshoot of CHE at that stage, which was basically a befriending service. But it wasn't something that you just rang up every night and just talk about your troubles or whatever. And the other thing was that we wanted a disco. There were no sort of... There was one half-gay pub at that stage. It was called the Red Lion, opposite the bus station and opposite the ABC cinema. And I remember going in there the first time I sort of stepped into my toe into what would have been the commercial scene. I was still worried about... This was even before I'd come out. Before I'd met Mick. I'm going back now to the previous year. I decided I ought to go in and see. And I hung about outside the pub for ages and ages. And every time I wanted to cross, I hung about in the foyer of the ABC cinema. And I can still remember the film that was on. It was Raquel Welch in 1 Million Years BC, right? And I was, you pretend to be looking at the stills and things, and I sort of realised I was looking much more at the male star, whose name was John something, that I was looking at Raquel and her endowments. So blushed, and surely people must see me, they must know what's going on. And every time I tried to cross the road to go into the pub, I'd see somebody coming around the corner, so I'd go back into the door. And eventually, about 5 minutes before closing time, I thought, oh, come on, you've got to do this, you stupid idiot. So I went into the pub, and it was such an anticlimax, because it was a mixed pub, and I had no idea who was gay and who wasn't, because everybody looked exactly the same. And I later discovered there was one end of the bar that was gay up there. But at that stage, I just complete anticlimax. Who do I go to? Who do I talk to? Who do I chat up? No idea. And so that was that. That was a slight side issue. So we wanted a disco. That was the only gay life there was in Oxford at the time, apart from the cottages. And so I did a sort of recce around, and I found a pub called the Cape of Good Hope, which was down there's a roundabout, St Aldate's, on the other side of the Charwell, going into the town side rather than the university side. And the pub was on the corner there, Ava Good Hope. It was an Irish pub. The downstairs had lots of sort of Irish labourers and stuff, for building sites and whatever. And the Irish landlord called Pat. And he said, yes, I got an upstairs room and stuff. And we went up and looked at it. Yeah, it would do. And then we sort of advertised for a DJ whose name was Richard and was gorgeous in that kind of hippie sort of way. He had this long golden hair and stuff and turquoise eyeshadow. And he wasn't gay. Oh yes, and crushed red velvet loons. That's the other thing I remember. And he, as I say, he really was gorgeous. And he played up to it as well. He had one of those moth-eaten fur coats, which hippies did in the sort of early 70s as well. And he sort of swished around in this. He was really good, really good DJ. At the end of it was a Friday night we had the discos, and at the end of it, it was always from mid-73 anyway. He always played Lou Reed, "Good Night, Ladies, Ladies, Good Night." That was our sort of going home track. And he gave me a lift home one day, but no, it wasn't home. He gave me a lift in his car, a little Mini, and he gave me a lift in his car, and I thought, oh God, maybe my luck's changed, maybe we're in here. But all it was he wanted to sell me some dope, because he just had a sort of about half a pound of dope arrive, so he was dealing that as well. So I had that, but nothing else, unfortunately. So that was the disco. The switchboard was funded by the disco, basically. It was hugely successful. We made an awful lot of money on it, more money than we knew what to do with. And we went on demonstrations, but not gay demonstrations. It was very much the time of the fighting anti-trade union legislation. Edward Heath was Prime Minister, and there was a lot of campaigning against that. So we actually had an Oxford Gay Action Group banner on the TUC march and got a certain amount of flack for that, it has to be said, by the other trade unions, because trade unions were very straight at that stage.
Hi, hello, this is Darren Brown. I just wanted to say I was one of the first people to have Danny come and film my parents for me, and it was one of the best things I think I've ever done. It was a really beautiful thing. It's a very discreet, lovely, gentle process. My mum and dad loved it. I actually did the interviewing, and sometimes Danny does that, but it was quite nice to do that myself. And I interviewed them both, and then together, and left everything in the hands of Danny, and he created this beautiful set of films, which I've now got forever. And with a young nephew growing up, it's going to be a wonderful way at some point for him to get to know his grandparents, and it will always be a beautiful thing to have. And the act of listening to their stories, quite aside from preserving them, but actually just listening to them and spending time with them and asking those questions and digging deep into their background and just finding out things that I didn't know was really wonderful. And now I've got a record of that forever. I really, really recommend it. It's a lovely afternoon. They are the nicest guys to have in your house. And it's Danny himself who comes over and does it, and clearly loves doing it too. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did, and it comes to mean as much to you as it did to me. Thanks.
Pride. We did a Pride stunt on, I think that must be 73, and it wasn't a Pride march, it was a Pride punt. We actually, because all the colleges have their fleets of punt. So everybody in each in the group hired a punt if they could, if they were a member of the university. Although the group, it has to be said, was mixed, people in the town and university as well. So we had about half a dozen punts there, and what we did was we punted up the Chartwell, and with the big banner. And as you come to a point where there's a lock, and you have to take your boats up rollers, you have to haul them up the rollers and then put it into the water on the other side. And that was a kind of big open bit called Parsons Pleasure, which was basically a men's nude sunbathing place. And it didn't allow women in and stuff like this, although OGAC had many women in it as well, so coming on this march as well. And so when we got to the top of the rollers and put them in, and put the punts back in, right, the women sort of lay down on the floor of a punt so it couldn't be seen right, and when we were punting along right into it, and then suddenly stood up, and the banner came up, and we sort of chanted, come out wherever you are, out of Parsons Pleasure and onto the streets, that kind of thing. And you should have seen it was mainly dons, but some undergraduates as well. And you should have just seen the looks on their faces. They're all there with no clothes on, right? Because it's a nude bathing thing. And they're also going like that and stuff, and running off like headless chickens and into the bushes or back to the changing area. And so that was our pride action for 1973. What else did we do? We raised money by doing cabaret at Cape of Good Hope, and it's the first kind of queer cabaret that I did. That would have been early 1974, I think it would have been, and we did it for 3 nights, and it was a £5 a head, which at that time was actually quite a lot of money, but it would be at least 20 quid now for that. And it was done. It was all homemade. It was all people like me who were doing college reviews and things like that, and Nigel, and so on. And we had queues down the street. People trying to get in, desperate to get in, and people were offering us. We've come all the way from Cheltenham, 40 miles away, to come and see this. Let us in, please. We'll give you more money. We'll give you 20 quid and stuff. And we just couldn't do it. It was phenomenally successful because people were just so desperate for some kind of queer entertainment. There wasn't anything. Everything on the television was like negative stereotypes, and you couldn't see anything authentic at all anywhere from miles and miles around. I mean, the most authentic things would have been some of the drag acts in London at the time, So nothing around there. So we did that. We organised conferences as well, and this was all funded, as I say, by the disco. And so that was my college life. Looking back on it, I could probably have had a lot more sex than I actually did, because I was so involved in just organising things. I was just so focused on that, and I didn't even notice when people were chatting me up. So that was that. One thing that the Oxford Gay Action Group did was to establish contact with the Women's Liberation Group. It was sort of standard gay thing, Women's Lib sort of joined up, have joint meetings and stuff. And the first time we went along, it was a bit formal, a bit sort of awkward, but there was a woman there that I hit it off with instantly, and I suddenly rediscovered my bisexuality. And in fact, she was married, but we started a relationship together. And when I moved up to Birmingham, she moved up to Birmingham as well, though not to live with me. And we continued to have a relationship for the next 8 or 9 years, on and off. I mean, we weren't always in the same place and stuff, but she was a real part of my life through all that time. But it was a bit of a kind of dirty secret in a way. I mean, I don't want to disparage it, but it was, if you're a sort of leading member of a gay organisation, or even a member, to actually admit you were bisexual at that stage would have blown my reputation completely. Because at that time, people who were bisexual couldn't make up their mind. Basically, it was a cop-out, because for many people, it's a kind of stage that they go through from being straight to saying, oh well, maybe I'm bisexual and stuff, and finally admitting further down the line that they're gay. So there'll be a lot of distrust for about bisexual people. I remember, dear oh dear, another thing to make me blush. I remember saying to the London bisexual group, they used to meet in Heaven in the early 80s, and I went along to give them a talk and said, you really got to make your minds up. And there is a kind of justification behind that, because it's not, I mean, labels, all labels, are a way of kind of asserting something about yourself to society. And basically when you say I'm gay, you're making an assertion in what you think is a fundamentally hostile world, or at least you were then, and so on. And so it's the gay part which needs encouragement. It's not the straight part that needs the encouragement. So I always said, even if you are bisexual, you should identify as gay, which by and large I did do. But as I say, we had this kind of so-called dreadful secret between us. And then many years later, when I came to London, I started working for Capital Gay, which was the gay free sheet in the early 80s, went through to the late 90s. And they had, it was a weekly paper, and they had regular columnists each week. And for about 5 years, I would do one week, and she would do the next week. So the two, the lesbian column and the gay column, actually the people who wrote them were in a relationship with each other as well. So again, that was definitely not something that was broadcast at all. Anyway, back to Birmingham. I moved up to Birmingham, and I had a job at a place called the Birmingham Arts Lab, a sort of experimental place. And I wasn't there very long. I was there for about 6 months, because I wasn't terribly in sympathy with a lot of what they did, which I thought was a bit wanky and self-indulgent, and it was very sort of self-consciously avant-garde stuff. But during the time that I was there, I established contact with what became Gay Sweatshop, the theatre company Gay Sweatshop, which was the only queer theatre company for a very long time. And they started off with a show called Mr. X, which I booked into the Birmingham Arts Lab. And it was quite extraordinary, because people were coming along to see that show. Gay people, particularly gay men, were coming along to see it, who had never consciously been in a room with a group of other gay people, and it was very difficult, because a lot of gay men didn't know how to talk to each other at all, because the only time you met other gay men was in a pub to pick them up, or in a cottage, and there was no kind of social interaction, if you like, at all for a large number of people. And there would be discussion groups after the show, and all over the country, gay groups formed as a result of a group of people going to see that show and saying, yes, we must start something here and get other things done. So that was my contribution to gay culture at that stage in Birmingham. But after that, I went to a thing called Pub Theatre Company, and I also joined West Midlands Gay Switchboard, which was based, Birmingham had a gay centre in those days in Digbeth, and the Switchboard was based in the gay centre. And I can remember, the one thing I remember about it was going to a conference, I forget where now, of gay switchboards. They were all called gay switchboards, there wasn't LGBT at that stage at all. A conference, and there was a real resentment for London Gay Switchboard. London Gay Switchboard was always saying, we're the biggest, therefore we know what to do, we know how to do these things, and not realising that other people had been there before, and they were saying, we were the first gay switchboard in the country. No, you weren't. We were in Oxford, and so they were arrogant. They were really arrogant, and we resented that. But the big argument was about whether you should have sex with clients. Nowadays you can't imagine this, I don't think. But there were switchboards around the country, and there was a group called Icebreakers as well in London, where it was permitted to have sex with clients, and because you rang them up on the, they rang you up on the phone, and then maybe you go and meet them afterwards and talk to them and so on, take them along to a pub, bring them out of themselves, whatever. The argument was, for the people that said you should be able to, not that it was compulsory. The argument was, actually, that's the first thing that people want, first of all. That, if they have never met any other gay person, of course, they're horny as hell, they're really wanting something. And it's a way, actually, of getting people into the idea of homosexuality and being gay and introduction to gay life, if you do actually give them what they want at the start. And I remember hearing that argument many times. But we didn't, in the West Midlands Switchboard, we didn't have sex with clients at all. We met them, we took them along to the discos in Digbeth, but that was it. And about this time, I also left Birmingham Arts Lab because I had an argument over premises. I won't go into all the details, but we were going to have to move because the lease was running out on where we were, and the question is where we were going to go afterwards. And I wanted to go one place, and the rest of the staff didn't want to go there at all. So I was out on a limb, and so I resigned. So another job, I had to find something else to do, and I joined a thing called Pub Theatre Company, which took plays around pubs in the West Midlands area, Dudley, Solihull, and so on, and performing new work by local writers. And that's where I started actually writing plays for that company. Well, no, I didn't write it. My first full-length play, which was a thing called Latecomer, I actually wrote for Gay Sweatshop. They were looking for new material, and obviously I'd put them on in Birmingham before. And so I sent this play off to them, which I was terribly proud of it. And they sent it back saying, not for us, thank you very much. So I thought, that was when I learned if you want something done, do it yourself. And so I took it to Pub Theatre and we did it there. It was a very talky play. It was a kind of is he, isn't he, will he, won't he sort of play. There's some elements of Agatha Christie and George Bernard Shaw as well. Lots of argument in it as well. But the fascinating thing about it was that during the course of it was a cast of four men. And I was working with a group of straight actors, basically, in it. But during the course of the play, just by the fact of doing it, two of them came out as gay. So it actually had that effect. It was a play that actually affected people's lives like that. And from then on, I was writing quite a lot of sort of queer stuff. I was writing it for Pub Theatre, but also there was a company at the Gay Centre, a little theatre company called 1 in 10 Theatre Company. And I wrote stuff for them, like review-type material and stuff, and took that around to gay bars and student union And that's really where I started what became my life later, which was organising gay theatre companies to go all over the place, sort of thing. We went to conferences. We went to the CHE conference in Coventry in 1978. I remember that one as well. And in the meantime, I was having this relationship with the woman I mentioned, and I also met somebody else called Steve. I had a relationship with him, so it was sort of a kind of triangular thing. And eventually I realised that if I wanted to get anywhere as a writer, I was going to have to come to London. I was lucky. One of the things that I did for pub theatre was I wrote a musical called Wednesday Matinee, which is very confusing because if you have a show entitled Wednesday Matinee and it's happening on a Saturday night, people get very, very upset. But this is what it was, and it was basically a show to celebrate the company's 5th anniversary, and it was designed to kind of showcase everybody. Everybody got a star turn in it because it was a series of individual numbers. It was about people who went to a cinema, and rundown cinema on a wet Wednesday afternoon for the matinee in 1963, and it had 2 gay characters in it. It had what was then called, as a kind of shorthand, the dirty old man, which was playing with a stereotype, you know, and it had a schoolboy just sort of coming out and stuff like this. And during the course of the ensemble's work, those 2 characters do actually sort of get off with each other. And there's also a sort of out of work young man who's a rock and roller who gets off with the usherette as well. So there's the 2 pairs doing a number together in parallel. As you see, it's all about having equal weight and equal value to things there. So he did that. And one of the people who came to see it was called Peter Scot-Presland, who was the producer of a series called Second City Firsts on BBC Two. He saw it, and I got an offer to do it as a show as part of this series on Second City First. And they hadn't done musicals before. Musicals on television, as I'm sure you realise, are actually very, very tricky things to do. And they were even much more tricky in the time we're talking about, which is like 1978. But anyway, they booked this and stuff, and I met the director, whose name was Robert. I can't remember his second name. But he came. I didn't get on with him at all because he came from a sort of documentary background, and the last thing musicals are is realistic. You know, you don't do that sort of thing. Anyway, and then we had arguments about the script, and it was the thing that they really argued about was this relationship between these 2 characters. Because, I mean, you know, the boy would have been 16 or so, again, illegal, and the man would have been considerably older, right? And here they are, sort of getting it together, not in this very sort of sexy, explicit kind of way, but getting it together in the show, and they didn't want that. But because it was the kind of show where the relationships balanced each other, and because it was actually all written in lyrics, you couldn't actually take those characters out without completely rewriting the whole show. So I said, no, I'm not prepared to do that, I'm sorry. Anyway, I made about 3 or 4 trips down to London, and I argued it with the director, and I argued it with the producer, and so on. And I beat them down so that in the end they only wanted 2 words changed. And the 2 words they wanted out were pulsating and toilets. So that we'd been through this took about 3 or 4 months, and it was getting nearer and nearer to the time when it was to be cast and so on. And they wanted Beryl Reid to play. There was a housewife character, bored housewife character. They wanted Beryl Reid to do this one, and I forget who else they wanted. She's the one I remember. But then there was a musicians' union strike, and so the whole thing had to be postponed. And it got postponed again, but then Beryl Reid wasn't available and stuff. And so it went on and it kept getting postponed, and eventually it just disappeared into the sand, so it never happened. which was a great shame. So that was another sort of gay thing. I was writing quite a lot of gay stuff at this stage, and lesbian stuff as well. But I moved down to London because I thought that's where the action was. And so I had to find a job in London. And the only job I could find that would actually pay my expenses was the tax office, the Inland Revenue. So I became a trainee tax inspector at the age of 30. And we hired a van, loaded it all up with all our stuff. I say we, this was me and Steve and the woman I was having a relationship with. We had this triangular situation, very Sunday, bloody Sunday. And we all three together came down to London with the intention of looking for a squat, because in those days it was much easier to squat than it is now. And there was an organisation called the Advisory Service for Squatters, ASS, which was based in Islington in St Paul's Road. And so the first thing we did was knocking on their door and say, "Can we have a squat, please?" And they were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant. They said, "Well, come to this house and sleep on the floor tonight." So we slept on the floor that night with a van outside full of all our stuff. And the next day, we sort of looked around at what there was, and we found a place in Wiston Road. And basically what we did was we went in the next night and unloaded all our stuff into it, and we were there. It was great. And so the first day we were in there, after that had happened, we were sitting there surrounded by sort of tea chests and stuff like that with all this sort of stuff, and little transistor radio and stuff. And we sat down and I switched it on, and to hear the first story I'd written for BBC Radio for what was called a morning story slot at 11:15. It was called Me and Mr. Mandel. It was about a relationship between two old men, which may or may not have been gay. And it's really weird, sort of sitting in a squat, hearing that on the radio going out. So then I'm sort of settled in there, and I'm going off from this squat in my suit every day to the tax office. And this is now 1979. And after I'd been there for a few days, when you go and look for a new job, you sort of case the area, find somewhere you want to have lunch or park where you want to sit or whatever. So I wandered around the area. And this was in Tavistock Square, near Russell Square Station. And I went round the corner after a few days, right? And I discovered Marchmont Street. And I went down Marchmont Street, and there was this bookshop there, which they were actually busy painting the outside of. And that was Gay's the Word, which had just opened. And I went in, I was absolutely delighted there. It was brilliant because they had a piano there, and they had the sheet music for Ivan Novello's Gay's the Word on the piano as well. And so I started going in there at lunchtime. You know, you could take your sandwiches in there. They'd serve coffee and stuff like that. I didn't know anybody apart from the people I came down with in London at all. So I got to meet people there. And after a few days, my boss at the tax office called me in to his office to say, "You've been seen going into a certain place." And I said, "Yes, Gay's the Word, yes." "You mustn't." I said, "What?" "We don't want you going in there, but it's my lunch hour, you know, I can do it, "No, you mustn't, because the people whose tax affairs you may be assessing could see you go in there and lose respect for you." That's what they sort of said. So, my resignation was on his desk the next day, of course. I was out of a job. From there, I got a job at a cinema in Dalston called the Rio Cinema, And that was good. I was kind of administrator for it, but I got to program some theatre stuff in there as well. I think I put on people like Alexei Sayle when they were just starting in the very early 80s. I also, again, put on some gay stuff there. I organised the first LGBT film festival in London there. I got a week's programming of that. I mean, it wasn't sort of really groundbreaking stuff now. It was just everything that had come out up to that point, sort of thing. I tried to get a couple of American sex education films over through customs and stuff. But that didn't happen. The Americans chickened out of sending them eventually. We put it on for a week there. That was okay. And I was there for about a year, and then again I left because Gay Sweatshop folded at about that time. They lost their Arts Council grant. They'd been funded from about 75 to 79 by the Arts Council. But then the Arts Council decided that they weren't professional enough because they were doing sort of touring to sort of small-scale venues, community venues. The shows were pretty rough and ready a lot of the time. They didn't have proper sets and things like that. And the Arts Council basically decided that was not good enough, and they'd lost their funding. And they got it back about 3 years later after a very concerted campaign by people like Ian McKellen and Anthony Sher. But in the meantime, I was sitting there thinking, we've got to have a theatre company, a queer theatre company in London. We really must. So again, I put adverts in Time Out at that stage, saying anybody interested. And we found a community centre in Islington called the Thornhill Neighbourhood Centre, just off the Caledonian Road. And the first time, we had about 20 people turn up. And it was split between people who really wanted something to use as a kind of exploration for coming out, and people who actually wanted to do shows and things. And that was a very difficult thing that wasn't very compatible in some ways. But for the next 5 years, we did actually put on shows in pubs, and we took them up to Edinburgh, for example, to the festival, and ran weekly workshops as well every Tuesday. It was a hell of a lot of work, it really was. And during that time, the people coming along to the workshops not only discovered more about themselves and stuff, some of them actually turned out to be really quite good actors as well. So we did that. And the shows that we did them mainly in Islington, a pub called the George at the bottom of Caledonian Road. Bottom of Liverpool Road. And what did we do there? We did the first British performance of a thing called Kiss of the Spider Woman, which we did basically by just not asking permission for doing it. It was published as a novel at that stage, and I converted it into a play, and we did it. The other thing that we did during this time was, I've always had this idea that you should try and do things in the space, in an appropriate space, reclaim spaces. And one of the plays that I did was a parody of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which was called A Midsummer Night's Scream. And it was based on a true incident, which I came across in a magazine called Come Together, which was the Gay Liberation Front magazine of the early 70s. And in one of the issues, there was this account of how they decided, this was Camden GLF, decided that they were going to go up onto Hampstead Heath, and they were going to engage with the cruisers up there who are around sort of picking up, and they were going to sort of give out leaflets and tell them why they should come to GLF meetings and stuff like this. And of course it was a complete disaster because nobody wanted to know. They wanted to go off, have sex in the bushes and stuff. Eventually the people from GLF gave up and said, if you can't beat them, join them, so disappeared into the bushes as well. But the detail that really got me about this story was when they went up, they took a tea trolley with a tea urn on it, and they covered it in fairy lights so that the cruisers wouldn't be scared off. Now, if I saw a tea trolley with fairy lights coming towards me in a cruising ground, I'd run a mile, wouldn't you? So that was it, and that was the basis of the play. There was 2 GLF people going up onto Hampstead Heath with a tea trolley, and it was based on A Midsummer Night's Dream. And one of the GLF people was called Peter Scot, and the other one was called Orange Blossom. And they took this, on the Heath they met various characters. There was a leather queen, there were 2 clones. There was a policeman who was trying to get cheap arrests, easy arrests, called Raspberry. And a magic potion gets into the tea urn, as in A Midsummer Night's Dream, so that you drink the tea, and so the first person you clap eyes on falls desperately in love with you. You fall desperately in love with them, and so on. So there was a lot of coming and going, and people falling in love with the wrong people and stuff. And so we did that in the theatre to start with, and then I thought, well, why don't we take it up to Hampstead Heath? Why don't we do it where it's set, on Midsummer Night on Hampstead Heath? And that's what we did. We went up on June the 21st, 1982, with a tea trolley, and we had those big garden flares. I don't know if the sort of thing, these days they're sort of electronic, but in those days you actually had to light them. They were like enormous candles. So we had those all around. And I took the precaution. This was just after Ken Livingstone's GLC had taken over the GLC. Suddenly it had become a lot more radical, a lot more feminist friendly, a lot more queer friendly as well. So and the GLC actually had the rights, owned Hampstead Heath. And so I wrote off to dear Ken Livingstone, we want to do this show, can we do it please? And we got permission back, that was good. And somebody from LWT came up and interviewed us as well about what we were going to do that night and so on. And the police come up, all they're sort of barreling down, what's going on here sort of thing, stuff. Have you got permission to be here? And I could actually turn around and say, yes, and produce the letter signed by Ken Livingstone, say there. So we did that. And that, we must have got, we went down to the King William IV, which was the gay pub in Hampstead, and the Black Cap was the one in Camden, and told them this was happening that night, and we went up. And when we went up there, we found, when we came to do it, it must have been about 150, 200 people there, something like that, to do this, because it's actually in a natural amphitheatre, so there were people all around, and that worked very well. That was the night I met Tom Robinson. He was up there cruising that night, but he came out of the bushes to watch the show, which was lovely. And I'm still in touch with him. I'm still a good friend with him. And so we did that one, and we did this. It became a tradition. We did it 4 years running. I wrote 3 out of the 4 plays, but it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it got to the stage. The last year we did was 86, and there were 1,000 people there. Now this is just an open air thing, no mics, you can't, right? And basically people are coming just as an excuse for a laugh and a piss up and all that sort of thing. And it just got to the stage, you're screaming yourself hoarse, and I just couldn't, we couldn't do any more because it was out of control, and that was the end of that. Meantime, I'd had this job at the tax office, and then at the Rio Cinema, and that finished. And the next thing that came along, which I kind of fell into, was Capital Gay. And Capital Gay was just starting up in 1981, founded by 2 people who used to work for Gay News. I mean, Gay News was the kind of foundation institution, but it was getting a bit dodgy by that stage. And they left and started this weekly free sheet, Michael Mason and Graham McKerrow. And because Graham had actually, he'd actually come out through the Oxford Gay Action Group in Oxford like years and years ago, and I'd sort of met him there when he was a kind of shy 17-year-old under the wing of an enormous lesbian called Louis. And he came there, and he came out through OGAG, as a lot of other people did who became quite important. And Graham came to me and said, well, look, would you like to write for Capital Gay? So I said, yes, of course I would. And indeed, I suggested Anna for the woman thing that, afterwards as well. So for the next 6 years, I had 2 columns in Capital Gay. I did that one on a fortnightly basis, which was a opinion piece, basically, come funny. I did some funny ones and I did some political ones and so on. I got into dreadful trouble on some of the political ones because at that stage I was a bit of a prude and I wasn't into drag at all. I was very rude about drag acts because they were predominantly mime. They were predominantly bad mime to what existed. There was very little that was inventive about them. And there were 1 or 2 exceptions to that, but I didn't really know them at all. So I did a couple of articles very rude about a group called the Trollettes. You know this, David and Jimmy Trollette. There's this duo act. David lives in Brighton. He's still going strong at the age of 87, still doing shows occasionally. And anyway, I sort of attacked them for being misogynistic and, derivative and doing us no good at all. And the hate mail I got as a response to this, it was absolutely awful. But the other column I did, it was a weekly thing called Cruising, and I just went around reviewing pubs, clubs, anything that vaguely gay that was happening. I just did an account of a visit there for the evening, and so on. I interviewed people. Why do you come to this pub? Whatever. I did some quite interesting ones. I did a Billy Graham evangelical rally for one of them. Which why are you doing this? Well, it's funny actually. That's what I thought. And I did a few other places, and I took it out of London as well. I did Brighton and I did Belfast. That was an interesting one as well. That was a 2-parter because I did I went to the queer pubs on the Catholic side, and also to the queer pub and at the Europa on the Protestant side as well. And this was at the time when the army were really very much in occupation as well. So I got flack for that because people thought I was being far too sympathetic to the Republican side, but actually I was treating them equally, So that's what I did through that. And one of the things that happened while I was at Capital Gay, do you know Armistead Maupin's Tales of the City? Armistead Maupin was an author who wrote this huge series of books called Tales of the City. They were actually filmed, they were televised, or at least 2 of them were, as series on Channel 4. Well, they were made for American television and then shown here on Channel 4. And they were a kind of cult in the 80s. And at that stage, there were 3 books that he'd written so far. I mean, I think there's 10 or 12 now. He's followed these characters through the last 45 years. Anyway, I was not only writing these columns, I was the paper boy. This was a free sheet that was delivered to all the pubs and clubs, anywhere gay, libraries as well, in London. And I had a paper round, basically, and it was something. We hired a van on a Thursday afternoon, and I just went to the station to pick these papers up from the printers. They were printed down in Hampshire, and they came up, and I loaded the van up, 30,000 copies. I mean, it was right down on the back axle, and had this list, and I went around London to 129 venues. That's how rich gay life was at this time in the early to mid 80s. And I started, as I say, on the Thursday night at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon usually. And then I finished at about 4 o'clock in the morning the next day. I must have done something like 150, 200 miles through London to get to all those places. Or, out into the suburbs, Wimbledon I went out to, over into West London, up beyond Hammersmith, up north, all over the place. I did that. And I always ended up at Heaven as the last place I went, where I had a friend who worked as a barman called Richard, who was a teenager, 16-year-old, who took the British government to court at the European Court of Human Rights when they were trying to get the age of consent down. He was the kind of test case for that. But anyway, he worked in Heaven. He was a very leathery teenager, and I always ended up having an enormous gin and tonic right at the end of the evening. I went home with more alcohol in my bloodstream than I should have had, I must admit, and that's what I did. But Armistead came over from San Francisco, which is where he lived, and he wanted to research his fourth book in the series, which was called Baby Cakes, because he planned to bring one of the characters, or two of the characters, to London. He'd met Michael Mason, who'd been in America, in San Francisco for the San Francisco Pride March. And so he came to the Capital Gay office and said, can you show me around London? So Armistead came out on the van run with me while I was delivering papers. And, we'd stop and I'd go in and say papers, and he'd come running in behind me, and I'd say, well, look, that's very interesting. They've got a goldfish tank in here, and this pub does this sort of thing, and this is a lesbian pub. This is a bit unfriendly, this one and stuff. And he was taking it all in, and a lot of this sort of background came into the fourth book of the Tales of the City series. So that's one of the things that I did. While I was squatting, I got word that some people wanted to form a housing co-op, a short life housing co-op in Islington, and asking people, it was largely friends of friends who came along to meetings in a pub called the Hemmingford Arms, on Huntington Street, that's right. And there was far more people than could be accommodated. There were 4 houses that were offered in the first place. These were short life places that would have to be done up eventually. So it was meant to be a six-month life. So we had this idea, we're going to call it Queer Street. But that was turned down by the charity commissioners on the grounds that it was insulting to homosexuals. So we'd obviously made some progress ideologically there. So it became Pink Triangle Housing Co-op. There was a lesbian house, there was a punk house, and I lived in number 37 Huntington Street, which was, these needed doing up really badly. I was living in the basement, and literally, you could take bricks out of the wall. The cement was so rotten. And at night, we had the nuclear trains with the nuclear waste going past on the North London line, what is now the North London line, in the overground. And these are very, very heavy. These are lead carriages, and they shake, and the whole wall was shaking always as the trains went by. So that was my sort of queer house at that stage before I moved to South London. And I was in there. We had my friend Anna, of course, was one of the people. We had 3 gay brothers, and I forget who the other person was, but the one in front above me was training to be a concert pianist. And the basement had rather low ceilings, and he had a grand piano, and he would be practicing Chopin and things. And there would be one bit that he'd always get wrong, and he'd stop and go and do it again, and go and do it again. And it used to drive me up the fucking wall, it really did.
Mum was a housekeeper. She came from a little town called Aberfan, which has unfortunately infamous past that it had a disaster, a great disaster, when her actual school was crushed by a coal tip. This is just a very short little instrumental. It's called Isabel's Waltz, and it's for my mum, who was Isabel Mary Jane.
Silver Screen Family, because everyone has stories that shouldn't be forgotten.
In 1985, Customs and Excise seized books from Gay's the Word bookshop. They seized about 2,000 books that were being imported from America for the shop. And they were completely indiscriminate in what they seized. People like Gore Vidal, Tennessee Williams stuff, classics. And it was quite clearly an attempt to drive the bookshop out of business by starving them of stock. So there was a big campaign to raise money for the defence costs. The estimate was that it was going to cost about £50,000, which in those days was a lot. I mean, today that would be £150,000 easily. So one of the things that I did as part of my theatre group that I mentioned that we'd started, which incidentally I haven't mentioned what it was called Consenting Adults in Public, is what it was. And we did a benefit for the Gay's the Word campaign, and we did a reading of the Maupin books. By that stage he'd written and published in America, number 4, the one that he'd been taken around for, right? So, I mean, I got in touch with Armistead and sort of said, can you send us, copies of all of the books, plus baby cakes as well, and we're going to read them. We're going to have a cast of something like a dozen people, so we're going to need a dozen copies of the book, of all the books, all 4 books and stuff. And he did send them. He sent them to my parents' house in Thame because he was worried if he'd sent them anywhere else, he was worried they'd get seized, because I was quite well known at the time. I won't go into the whole detail about that because that's actually subject of another film, which is called One for the Books, which came out last week. It raised about £2,500. It's the biggest single fundraiser for the Gay's the Word defence campaign. We were very involved as a company in the community. I mean, we defined ourselves as a community queer theatre company because I think in the 80s and to a certain extent the 90s and certainly in the 70s, there was a community in the sense that there isn't a community now. It's become so fragmented, so much of it takes place online that it's not like the geographical places that we used to have. So we did a lot of benefits for that. We did things for Switchboard. We did things for Outrage and ACT UP, the radical campaigns later on in the 80s as well. And then Section 28 came along, of course. By that stage, I'd left Capital Gay and I'd left Consenting Adults in Public Theatre Group. I decided when I was coming up towards the age of 40 that I really needed to make some money and, maybe even, God help us, have a pension. So I went into sort of respectable employment, worked in charities, things. I didn't have a boyfriend as such from... I'll backtrack on that. I split up with Steve around about sort of the end 1980, and likewise Anna about 81, 82. So after that, I wasn't quite on my own. I had a partner called Richard, who was a photographer for a while, who actually was a photographer, among other things, for Capital Gay as well. And then I had a relationship with a guy called Phil King, who was the convener of a CHE group. I mentioned CHE earlier. I was sort of in, and CHE I always regarded like a bit like the Labour Party. I sort of joined it and left it, and joined it and left it, and joined it and left it, whenever they did something which I didn't like very much. But at this stage, I was sort of quite on top of it. And I met Phil, who was convener of Southampton CHE, and he became a partner of mine as well. We lived together in Camberwell, in another squat. We're back in squats now, called Paulette Road, and we shared it with David and Harry. Harry Cohen had been, indeed was at this stage still, I think, the deputy editor of Gay News, and David was the advertising manager of Capital Gay. And we had this squat. The Lambeth Council used to discourage people from squatting by smashing the toilets and the plumbing system, so you couldn't use it. So you had to sort of build up your homemade plumbing system using bits of old vacuum cleaner hose and things like that, and bits of chicken wire and papier-mâché and all that stuff. And then you also had to get the electricity reconnected as well. You used to it's completely dangerous, hair-raising now. You actually took a old baked bean can and sort of smashed it so it's flat and stuff, and put it across the connection to get your electricity on. So that's where I was living then. Through the 80s, there were all kinds of attacks on LGBT people, of course. I mean, most obviously with AIDS, HIV, and the level of vitriol is almost impossible now to imagine. You know, there were calls for gay people to be quarantined. The Isle of Man was suggested, or the Isle of Wight, to ship all the queers to, so they can't infect anybody else. What they were going to do with the inhabitants of the Isle of Wight, God knows. So there was all that. And again, because my theatre group was part of the community, we did the first play in the world, I believe, about AIDS, HIV. It went on in October 1983. And it came to me, there was a script by an American lesbian called Louise Parker Kelly, who had a partner who was a very high-powered, high-flying businesswoman called Bernice, and she had been sent by her American firm to live here, and Louise came over on a 6-month visa to be with her, and she sent me this play, and I read it, and at that stage we knew nothing in this country hardly about AIDS, HIV. The only safe sex advice that was going around was don't sleep with Americans. And that happened for a few months until we realized that the safe sex advice that was being given out by other switchboards all around the country was don't sleep with Londoners. And suddenly you think, there's something really wrong here. So Louise's play, which was it was about somebody with AIDS. It was about the last stages of the disease. They end up dying. But in the course of the play, the last thing that they do as a positive thing is they make a video about safe sex and the need for safe sex. You know, I'm here, I'm dying, but I needn't have if I'd been a bit more careful, but we didn't know about it then, but you can, and you can survive. It's incredibly moving, and people in tears when we did it. And I've never been attacked in the same way as I was over this, because there was so much denial about AIDS, HIV at the time. We were accused of being scaremongering. We were accused of being anti-sex and Puritan because we were advocating use of condoms and so on. And so when we started rehearsal, there were 14 cases in this country. And by the time we went into production, into the rehearsals, by the time of the end of the run, there were 28 cases in this country. So it's that early in the epidemic. But it's one of the things I'm proudest of in my life, to actually have done that. It is actually on YouTube. We did it as a reading during lockdown, and it actually stands up pretty well, I think, still. So this is the kind of thing consenting adults did, and lots of benefits, as I say, for various organisations. The Lesbian and Gay Centre was coming on as well, the London Lesbian and Gay Centre, which opened in '86. We did a lot of work plays in there as well, and they did kind of prototype gay centres. Groups would do a day when they'd say, this is the kind of thing that might happen in the centre if we had it, and we would do a play or a cabaret as part of that. And then, of course, then came Section 28 in 1987, 1988. And I was working for CHE at that time, and I remember I think it was Monday, December the 7th, something like that, 1987. I was in the CHE office, and we got a phone call from Lord J, Douglas J. He was a Labour. He'd been a Labour cabinet minister under Harold Wilson in the 60s, and now he was very, very old and doddery, and you sort of thought a bit gaga. And he rang up and said, I think there's something you ought to know. There's something in the local government something, I think it's clause 14. It's just after dog licenses, he said. And I thought, what? So we went to look at this, and it was what became Section 28. He alerted us to it. And so I got in touch with Capital Gay and said, have you seen about this? Do you know about this? And they said, no, what? And I told them what we'd been told. And that Thursday, they ran about 4 pages about Section 28 and what a danger it was and what a threat it was to the community. And this was just before Christmas. And this is a time when there's no internet, there's no communication apart from the papers. And this is a weekly free sheet. Gay News is gone by now. And that's all there is. And so we've got December the 9th. There's an issue on December the 9th. There's an issue on the 16th of December. I don't think there's the one the week after. On the 23rd, it might have been. And then there's one just at the beginning of the new year. So that's the only time you've got to alert the community to what's going on. And at this stage, the Labour Party was actually all in favour of Section 28. It hadn't come out against it at all. So it was in the mainstream press, there was like nothing about it at this stage. So we still, by January the 9th, after this very, very short time, we still managed to get 10,000 people on the demonstration against it, which ended up in the park opposite the Imperial War Museum. I compared that. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. The police were out in such force for it. You know, there were rows and rows of mounted police. There were more police in paddy wagons behind it. And that was the start of the campaign against Section 28. There was another demonstration in Manchester, which we went up for. We hired a train to go up there, the Pink Express, to take up there. And I was still with Philip, my CHE partner at that stage, and he was the treasurer of CHE, so he organised the train. The money that we raised for the train came from collections at the march, people with buckets collecting it. We collected enough in sort of 10p's, 50p's, whatever, to actually hire a train from it. And I always remember taking all the, we had to take all the money back in a taxi to where we were living in order to count it all. It took 2 days to actually count the money when we got back there, and then to take it to a bank, in a shopping trolley, literally. Well, must have been getting onto £1,000 in 10p's and 5p's. Can you imagine how much that weighs? And we took it to the bank about 10 minutes before closing time. They refused to count it. Said, "Go away, come back again tomorrow." Came back tomorrow. "Oh, we haven't got the facilities to count this." So we had to go to another branch to do it. Anyway, we did. And we hired this train and we went up. And one of the people involved, Jenny Wilson and Lisa Power, had the idea of selling pink champagne, as it was the Pink Express. And so we got all these crates of pink champagne. And we thought we'd sell it on the way back from the march, people could relax and stuff. Except we realised, hang on, we're going to Manchester. There'll be a lot of people on this train who are going to want to stay over, want to go and party on Saturday night and so on. So there's not going to be that many people on the train back, or not nearly as many. So we decided to sell it on the way up. And as a result of that, when we got to Manchester, there were all these reporters at the end of the platform. It was going to be a big, big news story. But this drunken rabble poured out of the train. We were all meant to line up and march down the platform and stuff, but not a hope, not a hope. Well, that was the Section 28 campaign. But the one thing that came out of it for me as a positive thing was that I heard the actual clause, what it was. The local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality as a pretend family relationship. That was it. And I thought, promote homosexuality, homo promos. What a great name for a theatre company. So on the spot, I founded Homo Promos Theatre Company. There's a new company. And because I wanted to steer into the eye of the storm. Once the thing was passed and local authorities were told they can't do this, a lot of the venues that we played were funded by local authorities. So I wanted to test the legislation. And we only had problems with one place, which was a place called the Oval House in South London next to Oval Station, which did a lot of queer theatre at that stage. And they said, "No, we can't have you as Homo Promos." So what I did, I took our logo and I took a felt tip pen and I wrote in tiny little letters on a sort of insert thing, not N-O-T in small lowercase, so it was not Homo Promos. And that they would accept, that they allowed. But Homo Promos, I mean, we're now 36 years after that. And of course, the section was abolished in 2003. But Homo Promos, I'm glad to say, is still going strong.
Researching your family's LGBTQIA plus history can be both challenging and rewarding. Due to historical taboos and stigma, traditional methods may not always reveal the full story. Here are 5 easy steps to help you in your research. Step 1. Engage in family conversations. Speak openly with older relatives who may hold valuable knowledge about LGBTQIA plus ancestors. Create a safe space for sharing stories and memories that may unveil hidden experiences and relationships. Step 2. Explore personal collections and artifacts. Delve into family letters, diaries, photographs, and personal belongings. Pay attention to subtle details and coded language that may reveal identities. These artifacts can provide invaluable insights into their lives. Step 3. Seek community resources. Tap into resources and organizations dedicated to preserving history. Explore archives, oral history projects, and online platforms where you can find stories and information relevant to your family's history. Step 4. Utilize social media and online communities. Join genealogy groups and forums online. Share your own stories and questions, connecting with others who can offer guidance, resources, or personal connections to expand your research. Step 5. Consider genetic genealogy. DNA testing services can help you connect with relatives who may share ancestral connections. Analyzing shared genetic segments can reveal unknown relatives or provide insights into hidden lineages. Approach testing with informed consent and respect for privacy. Engaging in family conversations, exploring personal collections, seeking community resources, utilizing online platforms, and considering genetic genealogy will help you piece together a more comprehensive and meaningful understanding of your LGBTQIA plus family members' lives. By following these steps, you can piece together a more comprehensive understanding of your family members' lives and contribute to a richer family narrative. Share and celebrate your family's history with pride, fostering understanding, acceptance, and celebration of diversity. Remember, preserving family history is an ongoing journey that connects you with your ancestors and inspires future generations. By honoring and documenting these stories, you not only connect with your LGBTQIA plus ancestors, but also inspire future generations to embrace their true identities and live authentically. Subscribe to Silver Screen Family and start capturing your family's history today. silverscreenfamily.com. Affordable, professional family documentaries. Get in touch today, because everyone has stories that shouldn't be forgotten.